Right, ignore that weird air-cooled Multistrada from 15 years ago. You know, the one where you turn the bars and only half the fairing moves and they're a bit yucky and nobody really likes them. Let's just talk about the modern Multistrada as you and I know and love it, the liquid-cooled one. Been out since 2010. I did the press launch of the first one. I've ridden every single version in between now and then. I've just ridden what I think is the very best Ducati Multistrada ever made. It's the 950S. Stick around, we're going to ride it and talk about it. Just a quick one before we get stuck into Valencia and Multi 950 riding impressions. We're back at the workshop here at DM Performance. Dan's in the corner working on race bikes, doing his thing. As soon as we finish talking about this bike, we're going to get our heads together and talk about this bike. You may remember the Desmo project bike that we've been working on. We certainly haven't forgotten. We've just been flat out busy on, I think, 10 or 11 press bike launches in the last 5 weeks. So we're going to talk about Multi, turn the cameras off, talk about Desmo, and you can see that and all of the other bikes that we've ridden over the coming months. So as is the way with Ducati, I know lots of other manufacturers do it, but I know that Ducati like to let us know that they do these things, and it's quite impressive. They let people buy these bikes and then they chase them a couple of years down the line and ask them what they think of the ownership experience so far, take some feedback from them, and that shapes how the next generation of that particular bike looks for new buyers down the line. A lot of what this new 950 looks like might not on the face of it appear to be very groundbreaking. And again, that's because current owners really like the way that this bike looks. So if you look closely, you'll see that the side panels have been borrowed from 1260. You'll see that the swinging arm has been borrowed from 1260. Aside from that, visually, there aren't that many changes. There's a new cast wheel design, but there's also a spoke wheel design to choose from. That's the one I'd go for. Tiny visual changes that might lead you to think that there isn't that much of a difference between a 2018 and a 2019 950 Multistrada. There definitely is though. Everything that's going on inside this bike is what shapes how good it's going to be. And it's also what shaped my opinion, like I said earlier, that this is possibly the best Multistrada that Ducati has ever made. So 950 has borrowed lots of the good stuff from 1260 Multistrada as well. So what you'll see in 950 now is that 5.5-inch TFT dash borrowed from the big bike, but also within the bike, it now features the 6-axis IMU, internal measurement unit. So not only does that allow me to do this with my hands and show you that it has cornering ABS, but that same IMU is also hooked up to the indicators, self-cancelling indicators, proper self-cancelling indicators. They actually work. On the S model, we'll talk about some of the other stuff that it has, but also the cornering lights are tied into the same IMU that works with cornering ABS and indicators. There are two models of 950 Multi available, the standard version and the S. We spent all of our time riding the S. So both bikes are available in red or grey, and both bikes are available with cast or spoked wheels. We also rode the Touring Pack kitted S version in grey with the fancy wheels. So that's the most expensive version of this bike that you can go for. We'll get to the price down the line. So everything about 950S works for the rider. I'm not going to try and remember all of the seat heights and stuff. If you're about 6 foot, it's going to fit you. If you're closer to 5 foot, you're going to struggle to put a foot down. I think the base seat height is about 840 millimeters. But again, I think I sometimes get too wrapped up in trying to quote tiny detail numbers rather than share my impression and opinion of how these things ride. The biggest thing that I noticed the soonest on this bike, once we pulled away, was I had this quite vivid memory of riding the 1260 Multi Enduro in Florence a few months ago. That's a big bike, huge bike. This felt almost identical, but a lot smaller, so a 20-litre tank. Easier to get your knees around the tank, but also it still offers a level of weather protection for you. The key difference that I found at slow round town speeds, and also once we got out of town and started adding some speed, is how much more of the motor you can use and how much more involving the bike feels because of that. On the 1260, 158 horsepower, big motor, you're kind of chugging along at round town speeds looking for a gear that suits what you're trying to do. Or you're blasting stacks of power into the thing and drawing loads of attention to yourself by just riding a little bit too fast. The nature of a bike like a Multistrada is one that doesn't spend its life screaming at the top end of the rev range. and neither does it spend its life doffing around at tick over at the bottom. It's a bike that lives in the middle of everything. That's the whole point of a Multistrada. I think Multistrada translates to any road. So if you think about that in the same context with the motor, it should be able to do anything. And the 950, I think, does a better job of doing everything than the 1260 because it only makes 113 horsepower. So rather than 150, you've got 113. So what I found was I was using more of the power that was available more of the time, rather than riding around going, oh, I'm being a little bit of a Jessie, I'm not using all of the power available. Or using all of the power available and having people tutting at you while you're blasting past them down the road. So the slightly more expensive S model also bags you the Skyhook Evo suspension. It's Ducati's version of active suspension. So rather than me skimming through my notes and trying to feed you riding impressions now of a bike that I rode a week or so ago, I'm going to intro each part and then I'm going to cut to myself telling you how they feel out on the road. Let's start with those brakes. Oh man, these roads are amazing. As are the brakes. Brembo M432s. You can absolutely, look, shove so much speed off the bike on the way into corners. You get a little bit of a Pupamoto kind of point and squirt feel to this bike. Linked brakes as well, so cornering ABS and linked ABS from front to rear. So when you get on the front brake, you're getting a tiny bit of back brake at the same time. And you can feel it as well. So one of the things I've been thinking about is exactly what makes those brakes feel as good as they do. And for me, it's quite simple. Every bike has a number of key component parts and they all have to work with each other to give you the riding experience that you're having. A bike like the Multistrada 950, the reason why these brakes feel as good as they do is because the total weight of the bike, plus the suspension components that they've chosen, plus the tyres that they've chosen, plus the rider geometry, when you get on these brakes, you get instant feel. Suspension is quite happy, so you can take more or less brake. It's got a 19-inch front wheel, so you can tip into a corner really easily. Big wide bars, big front wheel, stacks of leverage, put it in. You can hang on to those brakes all the way up to the apex, and it's quite a reassuring feeling. It's not resisting what you're doing, it's just going, yeah, come on, we can do that. That's why these brakes feel as good as they do. We were just talking about the brakes, now we can talk about the suspension, which on this bike is the Skyhook Evo. So it's kind of adaptive suspension or semi-active suspension, sorry. So constantly making the changes that you would need to make with spanners on the fork tops. So the glory of active suspension is that you don't act... So mate? Oh, yeah, I'll have a cup of tea, mate. Being in a workshop is sweet. So active suspension, the glory of it is it takes all the guesswork out for you. If you're on your own and you're riding the bike and you can see one helmet on that cool TFT dash, that means the whole system is set up to work with just one rider, no luggage. If you want to firm things up a little bit, some of the guys did, I didn't really feel the need. You can push a couple of buttons and tell the bike that you've added panniers to the rear, so that should increase the preload at the rear. If that's still not enough, you can tell the bike that there's a rider, a pillion and luggage. And that will take you to the firmest setting. You can then go into those settings and play with any one of over 400 parameters. It's ridiculous how much adjusting you can do. But the glory of this active suspension is you don't need to do it once you're moving. It's doing all of the work for you, on the fly even. Right. Lovely old job. Cheers, pal. It wasn't even tea, it's fancy coffee, isn't it? I've got a quick shifter up and down the gearbox. I've only touched the clutch twice in about an hour. Once pulling away at the hotel or dealership, and once when we just pulled away back there. It is a great system. On the way down the gearbox, you sometimes just have to take up the slack. But it's a good system. So that 950 motor is the same as the one that you'll find in the Hypermotard. It's not actually a 950, it's a 937 L twin. Like I said, makes 113 horsepower, which is, I'm going to say for this style of bike, pretty much the perfect or the optimum amount of power that a bike like this needs to make. That's what gives this 950 Multistrada that rounded appeal that I think that it's got. So no, it's not the most powerful Multistrada in their range. Remember the 1260 makes crazy power, 150, 158 I think. But as they said in the presentation last night, cut to me looking bored in the presentation last night, this is the most rounded Multistrada in terms of, oi, we're stopping. Brakes are good. This is the most rounded Multistrada that they make in terms of accessible power at 113. So one observation, not a complaint. I don't think it's a negative thing because not many people will do it. The spread of torque is so big on this bike and the punch of power is so real that you really can feel the shift from 3 to 7.5, 8,000 revs of torque, that bit. And then when you get up into the top of the rev range, you get the power. Now, when you get to the end of the rev range and get the rev limiter, it's a bit of a smack in the face. It's quite harsh, really. I'll see if I can find somewhere where I can run it out while I've got the onboard on. Right, let's see if I can show you what I was saying about the rev limiter. Yeah, that just about covers it. One other quick point to note on the motor, something that Ducati are very proud of, and I think deservedly so, is the service cycles. Valve clearances are 18,000 miles and an oil service is 9,000 miles. If you've been living in a cave for the last 20 years and you still think that Ducatis just lob belts everywhere and explode every time you miss a service on them, you are very much mistaken. Things have moved on. I'm sure in the comments section on YouTube right now, there will be a disgruntled Multistrada owner who says that we don't know what we're talking about because he bought a bike and it exploded and Ducati don't want to know. But you could pretty much say that of any manufacturer out there. Ducati has not only worked their nuts off to try and dispel some of those myths and rumours of old explodey V-twin motors, but I hear about it less and less myself now. I used to get lots of letters from disgruntled owners. I don't really get them anymore. Ducati has refined the servicing process, the reliability and the accessibility of the performance that these motors have, more so than ever before. It's a really, really impressive piece of kit. Comfort-wise, we did more miles than we usually would on most press launches. Particularly with some Italian manufacturers, you'll find you get a quick ride around the block and then a 3-hour lunch in some amazing kind of pasta house in the middle of somewhere cool. This wasn't like that. We did, I think, 260 miles all in one day. A real mix of motorways, town, and mostly amazing curve after curve mountain roads. Beautiful ride, the perfect place to go on this Multi 950. This bike does also have Enduro Mode within the multiple riding modes that you can choose from. So by choosing Enduro Mode, that allows you to disable the ABS. You could, I dare say, fit some big knobbly tyres to it. You probably need to remove the front mudguard and do everything that a Multistrada Enduro is capable of doing. Uh-oh, we're off-roading. I'm off-roading. Ah! Yeah, this bike's mint off-road. Full tests. So this is a lighter and easier to use version of an already very good off-road bike. So if you really, really want to know, I'll stick my neck out and say the 950 will be pretty good off-road. If you absolutely 100% want to know the details, I don't have any because we didn't do it. I have just remembered that I haven't done my homework and recalculated what 6.7 litres per 100 kilometres of fuel means in miles per gallon, but if you know, good for you, figure it out. On the dash, I saw that I was doing 6.7 litres per 100 kilometres. Don't know what that means. We're riding with foreign journos today. It's usually just the English. Sometimes I struggle to keep up with all the Brits. But the little golden rule we all have is must smash all foreign journos, so in a nice way. So I haven't had my balls kicked for doing loads of wheelies on all the other press launches, but I've had a look at most of the other reviews that I've done and I've realised that because I'm obsessed with pulling wheelies, I do end up just trying to do them everywhere. I went on Multi 950 with the sole aim of trying not to do any wheelies at all, and I think I managed it. I don't think there's any footage of me doing any. In my opinion, a decent wheelie tells you quite a bit about a bike, the way it fuels, the way that it does stuff, the way that you can make up excuses about trying to justify doing wheelies. They do all of that. I didn't do any of that on Multi 950. I tried to ride it like a grown-up and it felt every inch like a grown-up's bike. Dan, back me up on this. Right, basically, in your capacity as essentially a factory GP mechanic,
well, you know,
Wheelies, what does pulling a wheelie tell you about what a bike does? For me, if you do the same thing on every single litre sports bike going, 4,000 revs, dump the clutch in second, you get a feel for a little bit of where the weight sits or where the majority of the weight sits, how it fuels. Yeah. If you can get the thing sat just doing this and looking awesome.
About being a hooligan, I think.
You're not helping.
I'm not sorry. Yeah, I'll get what
they
you're
do
saying.
help.
Yeah, they do help.
Do they help? There's nothing else to say about them, is there? They're just awesome.
Wheelies are badass, yeah.
Brilliant. Right, next week, elbow down. Let's skip back a couple of years to me riding a white 950 Multistrada and a GT 900 Tracer Yamaha. And I said the two bikes were pretty even. I think the Ducati nicked it. Within a year, I'd done the press launch of the 900 GT Tracer from Yamaha, and I said again, I think Yamaha have closed the gap and edged it on Ducati. This bike, again, pushes things a little bit further in terms of the perfect sports, long-legged, touring thing. These aren't adventure bikes. They're not out-and-out off-road bikes. They're kind of everyday, practical sports bikes, if you like. That's what they are. At 11,755 quid for the base model, and then a little bit more, 13,355, I think, for the base Model S. Ducati, again, has just stepped up their game enough, I think, in this sector in particular, to distance themselves from the rest of the competition. Sorry, too busy looking at these roads, and I've completely forgotten what I'm talking about. Sorry. So I really enjoyed the riding experience, every single part of it. I think there were bits of the ride where I felt like I was as comfortable as I would be on a Diavel, for example. I think there were bits where I was making all the same noises as I would on an old school Panigale when you're getting on the gas. And I think in general handling terms, especially in the twisty bits, it felt for a little while like I was on the Hyper Motard. So somehow Ducati has managed to blend all of the best bits of all of these other sectors of bike ownership that you can buy into, sports bike, cruiser, kind of weird supermoto, blended them all into this perfect package. That's exactly what Multistrada means to me.